America, the world's greatest democracy, and at its heart, the vote, the will of the people. But how do you know if the vote is counted correctly? And if you don't know, then what have you got? Democracy? This is the story of a small group of citizens headed by a grandmother from Seattle. They set out on a journey to ask one simple question: how does America count its votes? What they found was secrecy, votes in the trash, and how to change the course of history.
Something broken in the promised land.
When people see what's really going on, there's no way we will allow this to continue.
Back in 2000, Al Gore lost the presidential election in Florida amongst the chaos and arguments over how to recount the votes. But no one thought to ask how the computers originally counted the results. As dusk fell on election night, one official noticed something very strange, a sign that the heart of America's democracy was in danger. In Volusia County, Florida, an election computer counted Al Gore's totals backwards. He had negative votes.
It was showing a minus sign in front of the votes that it had subtracted from Gore. I mean, it wasn't like it was trying to hide it. It says there's minus 16,022 votes here.
How could a computer that is supposed to protect the votes of you and me count backwards to give a candidate negative votes? Either it was an error, or someone had tried to rig the election. There was an investigation into the negative votes, and it was established that the problem couldn't have been due to machine failure, because only the totals for the presidential race were affected. It looked like a second memory card may have been loaded onto the computer. Memory cards contain the votes, but this second card had disappeared, so they couldn't check it. The origin of the negative votes was never proved, but some engineers thought that it might have been an attempt to tamper with the election. But no one will ever know for sure. The software that counted those votes was owned by Global Election Systems. In 2002, they were bought by the Diebold Corporation. The software is a trade secret. It's against federal and state law to look inside Diebold's voting machines.
I was the chief technical advisor to the Secretary of State of the largest state in the United States, and I was not allowed to look at the software running in Diebold or any other vendor's voting systems. To this day, I have not been allowed to look at that software.
Software like this is installed in more than 30 states. If someone tampers with it, or it just malfunctions, then the wrong people can win elections. If that happens, hundreds of representatives, judges, and other officials may hold offices they are not elected to. Democrat or Republican, it affects us all. Bev Harris lives in Seattle with her family. A writer, publicist, and grandmother, she knew nothing about computer programming or election systems. But when her county bought a new touchscreen system, she started to ask questions. The answers she got reveal a system in crisis.
You know, I had a life before I did this, and I never really envisioned becoming any kind of an activist or advocate. But sometimes something comes into your life and you know, well, if I don't do it, then maybe no one else will, and then maybe I don't want to bequeath that to my children. I put 3 words into a news search engine, voting machines and glitch, and found dozens and dozens of elections that were miscounted by the machines. And about that time, I thought, we really have a problem.
What Bev had found was that you couldn't necessarily rely on the election results produced by voting machines. In Louisiana, Susan Berniker, a Republican candidate, filmed the proof when she went to check her results on a touchscreen computerized voting system.
This is where I came the day that the warehouses are open to the candidates to inspect. So I came here with an old college buddy. He grabbed his camera, and I asked him to show me how the machine worked. So I just started fooling around with the machine. And it's when I pressed the button next to my name, and then I look down and I see Mr. Gambaluca's name in the display when I press Susan Berniker.
Shall we do it again?
Do it again.
Yeah. Okay, here we go again. I'm pressing Berniker. Gambaluca shows up.
So we went down the row. We probably tested 15 machines, and I said, you know what, we don't have to test anymore. And that is when I said, oh my goodness, this is terrible. We can't count our votes, so how do we know this is right?
Because the casting of the vote is secret, it's rare to get documentary evidence of machines miscounting. But Susan's experience isn't an isolated problem. Computers count around 80% of America's votes. It's the counties that run elections and buy voting machines. So the make and model varies from place to place, but there are 2 major types. On a touchscreen machine, the software counts the selections you make on the screen. Optical scan machines read a paper ballot that you have voted, and machines read a paper ballot that you have voted.
7 o'clock, polls are closed.
The votes themselves are stored on the computer's memory cards.
This is the voter cartridge. This cartridge is very important, and it goes right into our bag.
There it is.
These memory cards are taken to a master computer, sometimes called the central tabulator, which reads the votes, adds them up, and then declares the winner. The problem is that you can't see a computer adding up the votes. So, how do you know if it's counted correctly?
Suppose that we didn't have any computers at all, and when you went to vote, the voting booth was separated by a curtain, and there was a guy behind the curtain who would write down your votes. So you just dictate them, he writes them down, and when you're done, you leave without being able to look at the ballot. Most people in their right mind would not trust this process. The guy behind the curtain could be incompetent, he could hear your votes wrong and record them improperly, or it could be that he doesn't like your political affiliation and would prefer to see your votes cast for someone else. In an electronic voting machine, you don't have a little guy inside the machine taking dictation, but you have lots of people who are involved in writing the software and lots of people who could have touched the software before it went into that machine. If one of those people puts something malicious in the software and it's distributed to all the machines, then that one person could be responsible for the change of possibly tens of thousands of votes, maybe even hundreds of thousands across the country. That's a very dangerous situation.
You know, I began looking into these voting machines, and one reason I was so curious is because it's a secret how they work. The companies that make them keep it a secret. None of the computer scientists felt they could even look at the code because the code was supposed to be a secret. The certification labs that examine it keep their process a secret of what they do, and even the election officials who buy the equipment are prohibited by their contract from ever looking and seeing how it works. What happened next really changed my life. I was looking for technicians who could perhaps answer some questions of mine, and while I was looking for technicians, I stumbled upon an obscure web page. The web page was an old predecessor of the Diebold Election Systems page, and I clicked a link, and that link took me to a site that was not a web page, but it was more like a library or an online filing system, and it contained a bunch of different files, just like you see on your computer, and within those were more files, and within those were more files, and The files were amazing. They were things like the software specifications, the software itself, the drawings for the hardware, the user manuals, passwords in some cases. It was the crown jewels for Diebold election systems.
Bev didn't know it, but what she'd just found was a computer program called GEMS. GEMS, made by the Diebold Corporation, counts around 40% of America's votes.
So I began downloading these files, and throughout the night I continued to download them. Throughout the weekend I continued to download them. There were so many files. It took about 40 hours to download all the files there were. And then I knew I would be working on this project for a long, long time.
Up to this point, only the voting machine companies knew how America's elections were actually counted. When Bev downloaded the Diebold software, the wall of secrecy began to crumble. The Diebold Corporation claimed that Bev had stolen the software from their FTP internet site.
The FTP site was an unfortunate situation, I admit to that. It was a situation where that information was out there, it was captured, which was our fault. We made a mistake, and we readily admit that. Will it happen again? No, it will not.
I had never looked at software code in my life, but as a writer, one thing you learn to do is ask a whole lot of questions and learn as much as you can about things. I will say that I didn't want to go through it. I thought, you know, maybe I can cover this story without really learning how it works, but it wasn't to be. I had to actually learn how it works. After finding the files, you know, I sort of collected together some various computer scientists or computer programmers who could help me understand them. And Avi Rubin did an amazing study with 3 colleagues of his.
I got a call that the Diebold code was on the web. Bev Harris had found it on Diebold's own site. And so, you know, did I want to analyze it? And I said, sure. You know, I was very excited about the opportunity to analyze Diebold's code. And I think it's the first chance anyone had ever had on the outside to see what's going on inside of these electronic voting machines.
Dr. Rubin found that you could hack into an election without even knowing how the system worked.
The problem that Bev has discovered is a pretty significant security hole, and it does open the way for people to really seriously manipulate the election in a way that's very difficult to detect.
But it wasn't just the Diebold machines that were a concern.
Sequoia, ES&S, and Diebold have the lion's share of the market. In fact, ES&S and Diebold alone have about 80% of the electronic voting market.
The state of Maryland had spent $55 million on a Diebold election system. They asked computer consultants Raba Technologies to test it. Raba were able to break into the machines in around 10 seconds.
I mean, what have they spent the $55 million on?
Accuracy and security and reliability of the equipment. Again, there's a perception there.
Well, it's more than a perception. I mean, these scientists broke into the machine.
I will tell you from what I read in the Raba report, and I've read it very carefully, is that the steps that they took and how they stated that they had affected the machine in an environment of an actual election would be virtually impossible.
Most states require that the voting systems be tested by independent testing authorities, or ITAs. But if the machines had been tested, then why were there so many security flaws? And why could they count votes backwards?
It seems I have friends, both in private industry, working for these companies, and working in government, that I don't know about and don't know who they are, who know there's something wrong. They're disturbed by what they see, and they want people to know what's going on. What I have obtained here, and these are hard to get your hands on, are 2 reports. One is for Vote Here, one is for Diebold GEMS system. They're both from Cyber, which is an independent testing authority. They have these extensive charts where they go over all of the different regulations in the FEC guidelines, and they have check mark after check mark saying that yes, they pass, they pass, they pass, they pass. Both of them are the same. You get to the last page, and there's a check mark in the other column. Something wasn't tested. And what was not tested is the security of the system. This is the test that tells us whether these things can be tampered with. And here I have penetration analysis not reviewed by Software ITA.
Bev founded blackboxvoting.org, a not-for-profit organization dedicated to consumer protection for elections. She published the results of her investigations on her website. Andy Stevenson, a candidate for Secretary of State in Washington, read her findings and decided to contact her.
I was still actually running for office, and my reaction was bleep, I'm screwed. Bev and I couldn't get any answers from our public officials, no matter how much we hounded them. It was just impossible. So we decided on our own to go get the answers.
Bev and Andy joined forces. They wanted to know why voting equipment wasn't being tested for security and why it could count backwards.
We set out to meet Sean Southworth in Huntsville, Alabama. He is the tester of equipment and software for all the major manufacturers of voting equipment.
Something's broken in the promised land. A broken promise in the promised land.
Hey, what you said? Is this real?
Just do what you do best, darling.
Andy was wired with a small camera. He and Bev wanted to be sure that their conversation with Sean Southworth was properly recorded, word for word.
I'm looking for Sean Southworth. That's you. Hi, I'm Bev Harris. I just had a couple questions.
Be to test all these things. It's cyber. Cyber's the one that's accredited. That's who you need to be asking these questions.
Well, it's actually you, because your name is on all of the documents.
Now, all we do is in the FEC guidelines. That's what we do. And we write a report. We test the software, we review the code to the FEC standards, and then we write a report. We don't certify, we don't recommend, we don't say, this is the best stuff you've ever seen in your life. We write that report.
How do you deal with something where it accepts negative or minus votes?
We don't.
Doesn't that sound, you just go ahead and write a report? You write in your report that that's a concern?
If you ask the EAC, who you should be talking to is who we write the reports for. We can't disclose our reports to anybody.
Right, and my question is on minus votes, because we now know that happened.
Do we put things in there that have that kind of verbiage? No. I don't know of any time that I've ever put a report out that would say that, because first of all, anytime we write a report, the system's gone through the testing. And first of all, the vendor's not going to want a report that has something negative in it. Okay. So they will retest and retest and retest and retest and retest until they make it right. Until we get everything in there that is done to the standard. Then we write a report.
So if cyber claims the machines passed the tests for accuracy and security, then why are they capable of counting backwards? And why can someone break into them in 10 seconds?
What people are saying is, why should they trust these machines?
I think the main reason is because everything is tested before it's ever deployed for an election. And it sounds like I'm a broken record, keep going back to that, but that's a very important step.
Bev continued her trip across the states. It was clear that the official records weren't going to reveal anything. So Bev started to raid the trash of the voting machine companies and their customers, the counties. She was joined in her dumpster diving campaign by Kathleen Wynn, an activist from Cleveland, Ohio.
Go figure.
Oh,
Okay.
have mercy. That was fun, and it smells delicious.
I mean, it's a hit or miss. It's like shopping. You never know what you're going to get until you go, and you open it up and go, okay, nothing. But you never, this looks like a possibility.
I think what we'll want to do is get to some place where it looks like we can be fairly undisturbed, you know, behind a supermarket or something.
Bev and Kathleen made dozens of raids.
It's legal. When they put documents out in a dumpster in public areas, it's perfectly legal to go get them because they're no longer protecting them. We wouldn't have to do this if our system wasn't secret and hadn't been turned over to private corporations. Digital camera. And unfortunately, what their inner workings are is the votes of you and I, citizens of America.
On July 11, 2004, during a raid on Diebold's own trash in McKinney, Texas, Kathleen found some of Diebold's internal accounts.
This is some of the stuff that we found actually in McKinney, Texas, in the Diebold trash. I found an accounts receivable ledger. And in the accounts receivable ledger, I was interested to see the top item was actually money due to Diebold from the 8th District Republican Committee. Now that's interesting because this is not an elections office that owes Diebold, which would make sense because they've purchased election systems. It's a Republican political committee paying Diebold. We have a right to ask why they are collecting receivables from the Republican committee.
Bev and Kathleen don't know what this item meant. What is known is that Diebold and some of its executives were major Republican fundraisers. In 2003, Walden Odell, the CEO of Diebold, had written a fundraising letter promising to deliver the votes of Ohio to George W. Bush.
It's important that your company is impartial, isn't it?
Yes.
So why did your chief executive say, "I am committed to delivering Ohio's vote to George W. Bush in 2004?
That quotation that appeared in the letter is something that he regrets. It's a situation where his personal preference has come over into his business practice, and he has committed to keeping a much lower profile when it comes to those types of activities because of that statement.
You know, people talk about partisan ties to the voting companies, and they're right. That being said, we're also seeing that it's not quite as simple a picture. We have the state of Maryland and the state of Georgia have Democrats very tightly wed to use of the Diebold system, and it's the Republicans who are fighting against it there. And in my own home county, Seattle, King County, Washington, it's the Democrats who are pushing these systems and the Republicans who are a little bit skeptical.
The new battleground was California, the center of the computer industry. And the Secretary of State, Kevin Shelley, was getting worried about security.
Well, in 2003, Kevin Shelley discovered that one of the counties was running uncertified software. And so he ordered an audit of all of the county's voting machines in California. And he discovered that none of them were using certified software.
They later even acknowledged that they were aware of the law, but even though they were aware of the law, they chose to ignore it, and they made those changes without seeking prior approval, which is a direct violation of state law. That's when I first came to realize Diebold's lack of integrity as a company.
Diebold was called to account by the state of California. At stake was millions of dollars worth of business, and Diebold was forced to put their president, Bob Urosevich, on the stand.
As you know, about a year ago, one version of the source code of the Diebold TSX system escaped your control, and some months later was investigated by a group headed by Avi Rubin, Professor Avi Rubin of Johns Hopkins University, and they wrote a report which found numerous severe vulnerabilities in the code that they saw. I would like your general reaction to those reports before we go a little more deeply.
Basically, the code was stolen. In there is passwords. In there is our encryption technology. Okay, now, you know, I'm not a rocket science, but let me tell you, if somebody steals the key to my house, the first thing I'm going to do is probably change the lock. So that's what we went ahead and did. That's exactly,
as you know, the code wasn't stolen. It was left on a public FTP site by your own company.
The code was lifted off of our site, sir, and we still believe it was
downloaded
stolen.
from. You know that.
Okay.
Now, of course, the source code, in fact, got out. The key is now published. What in effect you did, or your team did, is create a big complex building, put locks on every door, use the same key for every lock, and then published a picture of the key on the wall. This was far below the minimal standards of security.
But for Bev, there was a more basic problem than security. Could Diebold be trusted at all with the counting of the vote?
On topic number 1, Diebold, we have a company that lies. Yes, I'll say it, lies. Up here this morning, they were saying they'd made all the changes in the software to fix the multiple flaws that would have never been found in the beginning if I hadn't have found their files on the website, by the way. But, you see, there's something called release notes. It's a legal document. It is something that must show everything you did and did not change when you put out a new version. I obtained the release notes for GEMS. They did not fix any of the problems. This stuff was never corrected. I don't know what to say. How can you have a company say we want secret software that nobody, even the county registrars who are here testifying on their behalf, is allowed to look at? And when you look at it, you find flaws, and then they say, oh, you don't know what you're talking about, so you turn it over to scientific panels. They find flaws, they say, oh, don't worry about it, we corrected it, and that's a lie.
Bob Urosevich, Diebold's president, did offer this statement defending Diebold Election Systems, also known as DESI.
DESI understands that the SOS, the Secretary of State, and the voting panel are disappointed in the fact that the R&G Associates inventory report identified unqualified and uncertified software, and are looking at DESI to acknowledge that this should not have happened. To be clear, there was no improper intent or motive on DESI's part to give rise to this situation. At the outset, I want to be crystal clear that these allegations in this report about Diebold's deceiving are not true and are factually not supported.
A few days later, Kevin Shelley, the Secretary of State of California, announced the consequences for Diebold.
I am decertifying the Diebold TSX system, banning its use in 4 counties where it is installed. Furthermore, I have taken the additional step, and I have the letter here, just signed upstairs, of asking the Attorney General to pursue criminal and civil actions against Diebold in this matter, based on findings of fraudulent actions. We will not tolerate deceitful tactics as engaged in by Diebold. Don't try to pull a fast one on the voters of California, because there will be consequences if you do.
The state brought a civil action against Diebold, but never pursued criminal charges. The lawsuit was eventually settled for a payment by Diebold of $2.6 million. Bev was clearly hitting the industry's profitability, and she got legal threats.
It was truly a difficult time, and it's the kind of thing where, you know, it kind of can make and break a marriage. I was very lucky that my husband was absolutely behind this, because, you know, here we're looking at each other going, not only do we have no money, but we could get sued by the vendors because they think their stuff needs to be secret, and we could lose everything. And he simply said, you know, my family's been fighting for the right to vote. My husband's African American. He said, my family's been fighting for the right to vote for 6 generations. And we're not going to stop now.
In California, it was only the touchscreens that had been decertified. The central tabulating software, GEMS, was still in use.
Now, the central tabulator is sort of the one machine to rule them all. It collects all the votes. And every company, not just Diebold, has this central tabulator. Because, of course, the way you vote is you vote in individual precincts. They're scattered around. And there has to be one machine to pull all these threads together, add them all up, and pronounce the winner.
Bev wanted to find out if GEMS was really keeping the votes secure. And so she turned to computer security expert Dr. Hugh Thompson.
I was at this massive hacker/computer security conference, and I get approached by this grandmotherly figure, and she tells me that, hey, I've got access to the tabulation software from one of the biggest electronic voting manufacturers on the planet. I'm like, wow, that's very interesting. And then she says, can you take a look at it for me? I'd say the thing that shocked me was how easy vote totals could be changed. So imagine you can go into a box and essentially rewrite history, and there's no record of you rewriting history, and the only record of the history itself is the thing that you changed. And that's pretty scary to me.
Bev and Hugh worked out a way to demonstrate the insecurity of GEMS. She was invited to appear with her computer hack on national TV with former presidential candidate Governor Howard Dean.
All right, Bev, show me how to do this.
Well, what we have here is the central tabulator computer. Now, in a voting system, you have all these different voting machines at all the different polling places. All those machines feed into the one machine so it can add up all the votes. So, of course, if you were going to do something you shouldn't to a voting machine, would it be more convenient to do it to the 4,000 machines or to just come in here to one machine and deal with all of them at once? The GEMS program is the program that is the central tabulator program. And I'm going to put in a password here. Okay, we're in now. This is the official program that the county supervisor sees. As we can see here, Howard Dean has 1,000 votes, and Lex Luthor has 500. So you're beating Lex Luthor, and we're
2-1.
Yes, and Tiger Woods unfortunately doesn't have any votes yet.
All right.
All right, let's close this out. I was just showing you the legitimate way to go in and look at votes, which
All
of
right.
course you can't tamper with. Go to the Start menu, and I'm going to show you something tricky. And I want you to go to My Computer and just click that. And you're going to see go to Local Disk C and go to Program Files. Go to Central Tabulator Votes and then go to the sum of the candidates, which is that table. You see we have 800 votes here for you and 400 for Lex Luthor. Let's just flip those. We'll make that 400. And we'll give 100 votes to Tiger. Let's just see what happened here. We'll go back into GEMS the legitimate way. And as you can see now, Howard Dean only has 500 votes. Lex Luthor has 900 and Tiger Woods has 100 votes. We just edited an election. It took us 90 seconds.
Diebold and election officials all over the U.S. still insisted that their systems were secure. They said that despite Bev's GEMS hack, there were checks and balances, and that inconsistencies in vote totals would be detected in an actual election. This was just 2 months before one of the closest presidential elections ever. Those checks and balances were about to be tested.
Oh my goodness, you're getting so big.
Feel great, thank you. Let me go vote first.
Let's go. Okay, let's see if I can follow instructions.
The world watches our great democracy function.
All right, put you down for a second, sweetie.
It's that magic moment when the greatest democracy on the face of the planet gets to show the world how we work.
It would be nothing better for our system, for the election to be conclusively over tonight, so that I think it's going to be me, so I can go on and lead this country.
The politicians said everything was fine, but it wasn't. The machines weren't just insecure. They malfunctioned, leaving thousands without a vote.
And now, nobody knows.
On Election Day in 2004, we, like a lot of other organizations, had a voter helpline where people could call in and let us know the problems that they were experiencing. We logged in over 200,000 calls, and many of those people left a voice recording of what they actually experienced.
When I made my selection, it jumped from the square that I touched to the square above.
They said half the machines were broken.
There was one voting booth, one, for 3,000 people.
7.5 hours in line to vote.
And they put two machines
in another area with only 300 people and gave us 2 machines with 3,000 people.
And they have a lot more in the outlying, richer communities, and they don't have lines there.
I'm hardly around the first of the 3 rooms that I have to wait. The line is out to the street.
4 to 5 hour wait, you can't do. You can't do that.
Women with children having to stand outside in the pouring down rain.
There were a lot of people who ended up not being able to vote because they just couldn't stay in those lines. There were a lot of elderly people there.
It is not the people who do the choosing. Everything is so fixed. It's so fixed.
There is a calamity going on out there about how elections are conducted in this country. And it results in less voter participation and potentially a lack of accuracy in who's either elected or what decisions are made in the polling places.
As the precincts closed, the poll workers switched the machines to reporting mode, signed off on the results, and took the memory cards to the central tabulating computers.
Well, let me see.
America waited for the computers to give the official results.
Go to John first. Karen Hughes sounding pretty upbeat right now. John, what are you hearing?
Look, no Republican has ever won the White House without winning Ohio. That is a cliche. We repeat it a lot, but it also happens to be true. They've always said yes, Wisconsin and Iowa. If you look at the voting returns coming in right now, the latest I brought up a few minutes ago, I believe Senator Kerry has a narrow lead in both states.
I didn't turn on the TV for the election results, and I didn't turn on the radio. Instead, I sat here filling out 3,000 Freedom of Information requests to go to every county in the United States to obtain the internal audit logs of those computers, knowing that we wouldn't get them for weeks after the election, and that it would probably be certified and they would say, get over it, move on. And we would never know whether our election was controlled by 100 million voters or by one guy sitting in his grandmother's basement.
Black box voting needed the logs of all activity on the voting machines so that they could conduct an investigation for the people. They wanted the vote count to be independent from partisan politics.
In America, it is vital that every vote count and that every vote be counted. But the outcome should be decided by voters, not a protracted legal process. I would not give up this fight if there was a chance that we would prevail. But it is now clear that even when all the provisional ballots are counted, which they will be, there won't be enough outstanding votes for us to be able to win Ohio. And therefore, we cannot win this election.
People were stunned. John Kerry had promised to challenge the machines and amassed a network of lawyers to protect the votes. And then, Kerry stopped any investigation by conceding, less than 12 hours after the polls had closed. Cliff Arnebeck, an Ohio election attorney, spoke with John Kerry shortly after.
A call from Senator Kerry comes into the hotel room, which a group of us are there meeting with Reverend Jackson. Reverend Jackson puts his phone on the table, hits speaker, and we're now in a conversation. The first part of the conversation is a dialogue between counsel and Kerry. And part of that dialogue includes Kerry sharing the fact that in New Mexico, no matter what the demographics of the jurisdiction are, if the votes are being counted by optical scan machines, they're coming out for Bush. This is, to anyone who's familiar with the situation, this means Kerry knows there's fraud in that election.
And the optical scan machines are the clue?
Yeah, what he's saying is that it's the optical scan machines are being rigged to produce a result for Bush, contrary to what the votes the voters are casting. So this is not our conspiracy theory. This is not something we have to prove to Kerry. Kerry is sharing this as a matter of fact. Because Kerry conceded the incredible resources that he had organized for potential post-election litigation was not in the picture.
Kerry conceded, even though the results were from software he knew could be rigged, and the independent exit polls had predicted his victory. Now it was clear that the citizens would have to investigate the election themselves.
Another 4 a.m.
Bev and black box voting decided to start in Volusia County, Florida, where Al Gore had received his negative votes in 2000. Bev wanted to start by checking the printed results from each voting machine.
Our election, I thought, went extremely well, and I'm very tickled about it because it was my final election to perform. I'll be retiring on December 31st. So you can imagine how I was praying to come